folks, welcome to According to Sam. This is episode 250. Thank you guys for listening and watching. Hope you've had a great week. We're still talking about the Bush-Clinton dynasty in this podcast, and I'm going to pick up where I've left off in the last podcast. And if you've been following the past few podcasts as I've been talking about this theme and telling the story of the Bush-Clinton dynasty, I'm talking about the 2008 financial crash, which was a loot job. It was a transfer of wealth, but I'm explaining the motive behind everything that led up to that crash. And the reason why I'm telling that story is because what happened in those years leading up to the 2008 crash, and what happened under these three presidents who served, each of them served 2 terms, in the years of their presidency, how they set up the crash, how they took us from a era of peace and prosperity under the Clinton administration. The Clinton administration and the years that he was the president were the zenith of America. Ever since the Clinton administration and what happened under the Bush administration, the America has been in a downward spiral. And these guys set it up. They profited off of it, and a lot of their friends profited off of it. And that's what we've been talking about in this podcast. And all of these people, another thing that makes this relevant and why I'm talking about this is because all of these people have endorsed the Democratic nominee for president this year, Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has been endorsed by, George Bush hasn't endorsed her. He says he's not making an endorsement this year. And I've explained to you that that is an endorsement of her because he is the only living Republican president to come out and say, to say that I'm not endorsing anyone is an endorsement of Kamala Harris. His vice president has openly endorsed her along with 200 other Republicans from his administration, his father's administration, from the Romney and McCain campaigns have endorsed her. And then the Obamas, the Clintons, they've all endorsed her. So that's why we're talking about this. And I've been telling you about this dynasty, the Bush-Clinton dynasty. They governed over the United States of America. If you include the 4 years of the patriarch, George H.W. Bush, and the current 4 years of Joe Biden, then the Bush-Clinton dynasty has governed over the United States for 34 or 32 out of the past 36 years. For 32 out of the past 36 years. And this guy, 4. And they're telling you that all of your problems, all the problems in the country, all the problems in the world are because of this guy and his 4 years in politics. He was never in politics before he entered politics in 2015. He won in 2016, governed 4 years, and now he's running again. But he's the cause of all of your problems, not these guys. And Kamala Harris is running on change. She's running on change the same way that Obama ran on change in 2008, that he was coming in, that he was running against the Bush-Clinton dynasty and all the things that these two had done. He was running against that in 2008. He was going to change all of that. He changed nothing. But now Kamala Harris is running on the same change, and I that's why I'm telling this story. I want you to understand. I want you to understand the change that you can expect, because you're going to get the same change that you got from Barack Hussein Obama. Just so you know, this new commercial that Sam Elliott, if you don't know Sam Elliott, the actor from Roadhouse, he has been in tons of stuff. Great actor, actually. But Sam Elliott voiced this commercial for the Lincoln Project. And the Lincoln Project, if you don't know, this is a group of Republicans. These guys were Republicans from the John McCain and the Romney campaigns, and then they have been fighting against Trump going back to 2016 when he put Jeb Bush to shame in the South Carolina primary. These guys are, they're old school Rockefeller Republicans. So that's who the Lincoln Project is. So they put this video out with Sam Elliott voicing this new ad. I want you to take a listen.
I can't believe we're having this conversation again. So here we go. You know who the candidates are. You know what's at stake. One candidate promises a divided America filled with lies and hate.
One candidate promises a divided America. So this goes back to what we were talking about in the last podcast about how they're painting Trump as the one who brought all of the division in the country. Not this guy. Not this guy who took us to war after 9/11. He pissed away a 90% approval rating. He's not the one that divided us. It's this guy. This guy. He's the one that's dividing us, is what Sam Elliott's saying. Hold on. Where's that? Oh, here it is.
One candidate promises a divided America filled with lies and hate. And one stands for change. Kamala Harris has more courage, more honor, more guts than this guy ever had. So you decide, are we really going back down that same fucking broken road? Or are we moving forward towards hope, towards freedom, towards change?
We know a strong middle class has always been critical to America's success.
There's promise that lies in change, and the time for change is now. So what the hell are you waiting for? Because if it's the woman thing, it's time to get over that. It's time for hope, for change. It's time to be a man and vote for a woman.
It's time to be a man and vote for a woman. You notice how many times that he says change. It's time for change. It's time for that she's running on change. This is the change election. And I'm telling you, people, whoever voters see more as the change candidate is going to win this election, because this election is about change. Change is what this election is about and nothing more. That CBS or NBC poll that came out last weekend, 65%, and this has been a consistent number, 65 to 70% for over 2 years now, of the country believes that the nation is on the wrong track. And if you believe that Kamala Harris is the change agent, is going to take us in a different path, if you believe that, then you're going to vote for Kamala Harris. And if you believe that Trump is going to take us in a different path, you're going to vote for Trump. And whoever the voters see more as the change agent is going to win the election. That's what she's running on. That's what the messaging is. Well, they can't really get the messaging right. That is what the messaging is supposed to be. But listen to Tim Walz here. He didn't get the message about the messaging.
We can't afford 4 more years of this. We can't afford.
We can't afford 4 more years of this. Yes, we can't afford 4 more years of this. She's the current vice president, and she's running on change. She's been in power with Joe Biden for 3.5 years, and she's running on change. She's being endorsed by everyone from the Bush-Clinton dynasty, from the past 30 or 28 years. These guys have ruled. Endorsed by all of them. She's running on change. She's endorsed by the big banks, by all the Fortune 500 CEOs. And she's running on change. So This election is going to be an IQ test for this country. So we've also been talking about what these guys did in deregulating Wall Street, deregulating the marketplace in the Clinton administration, and that set it up for Bush. We've been talking about how let's name these guys: Alan Greenspan, Larry Summers, Robert Rubin, and then also Timothy Geithner was there. And you need to know these names because these names are going to come back and they're going to play a big part in when we wrap this story up. These guys, especially this guy, Larry Summers, and this guy, Timothy Geithner. They're gonna be there at the end of the story. So we were talking about how when Larry Summers was the Treasury Secretary at the end of the Clinton administration, this secret document that they kept secret from the American people, and they were circulating it throughout the Clinton administration and the Alan Greenspan Federal Reserve. And this document was warning that the United States was going to be completely debt-free, pay off all of its debt in the next 12 years. And it was identified as a crisis, The woman in the report, not going to listen to it again, but she says that we felt that it was something that we had to address. And I've been asking the question. I was asking a question in the last podcast. How would you address a problem like that? A problem that the United States is going to be completely debt-free in 12 years. How would you address that problem? I was telling you how the national debt, when that document was written and circulated in secret in the at the end of the Clinton administration, the national debt was $4 trillion. $2 trillion of it was Social Security. The debt now is over $35 trillion. So they did address it, but the question is how they addressed it, and that's what I've been talking about. So we were talking about in the last podcast how George Bush, Christian Welker from Meet the Press, in their new poll, their poll from last week, NBC's poll, they were commenting on the fact that Kamala Harris, that her favorables went from negative to positive in the fastest time that they had ever seen any other politician since George W. Bush the day after 9/11. His favorables went from negative to positive in one day. This attack took him to a 90% approval rating. 90%. The entire country was rallying behind him. Even Democrats, even people who didn't vote for him, even people that had accused him of stealing the election had rallied behind him. And I was explaining how in the last podcast that he pissed it away intentionally, that he pissed away that unity because he lied us into the war in Iraq, and he is the one who divided us, and it was all intentional. He wanted us divided because he can govern more with that divide and conquer type of us versus them. That benefits them. When Obama, when he first gives his keynotes, Obama was like new product that they presented to us, and his rollout was the 2004 Democratic National Convention when George Bush's Skull and Bones fraternity brother was running against him in that election. So they roll Obama out as new product in that convention. He gives the keynote speech, and you listen to that keynote speech. You listen to what Obama says in that keynote speech in 2004. It was all about how there's not a red America or a blue America. We're all Americans. Let's all come together. I'm going to bring us all together. All of that stuff. Same stuff Kamala Harris is saying today. That's what he was saying. He was going to bring us together. But he didn't bring us together. His mission was to divide, because it's easier for these guys to control the country if they have us divided and fighting with one another. So that's why it's part of the reason that Bush pissed away a 90% approval rating, taking us to war. But what I want you to understand is that George Bush did not take us to war by himself. George Bush went to Congress. His war was approved in Congress. And when he went to Congress and took these lies about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction and a nuclear program and all this stuff. Democrats controlled the Senate. I mean, the Democrats, they didn't have to pass the resolution to approve Bush's war, but they did. So Bush didn't do this by himself, is what you need to understand. Dick Cheney, who's endorsed Kamala Harris, he was a big part of selling the lies and selling the war in Iraq. Let's take a listen to Dick Cheney here.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use them against our friends, against our allies, and against us. And there is no doubt that his aggressive regional ambitions will lead him into future confrontations with his neighbors, confrontations that will involve both the weapons that he has today and the ones he will continue to develop with his oil wealth.
That's what he's saying. That's what they're saying about Putin right now. Everything you just said. All lies. All this was lies. All this was lies. There's no doubt that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. There were no weapons of mass destruction there. I mean, what are you talking about? These are the lies that he was telling. He wasn't the only one telling these lies. Look here, from the Bush-Clinton dynasty, Bill Clinton's wife, who was a senator in New York. Listen to her.
In the 4 years since the inspectors left, intelligence reports show that Saddam Hussein has worked to rebuild his chemical and biological weapons stock, his missile delivery capability, and his nuclear program.
All lies.
He has also given aid, comfort, and sanctuary
Big
to
lies.
terrorists.
He's giving aid, comfort, and sanctuary to terrorists. She's getting ready to say Al-Qaeda. That she's telling the lie on the Senate floor that Saddam Hussein was affiliated with Al-Qaeda. There was zero evidence of this. She's selling the war.
Sanctuary to terrorists, including Al-Qaeda members. It is clear, however, that if left unchecked, Saddam Hussein will continue to increase his capacity to wage biological and chemical warfare and will keep trying to develop nuclear weapons. Should he succeed in that endeavor, he could alter the political and security landscape of the Middle East, which, as we know all too well, affects American security.
So she's using the exact same talking points, if you don't notice, as Dick Cheney. They're using the same talking points. Because the talking points came from the Office of Special Plans in the Pentagon. They were creating the narrative to sell the war. And what I'm trying to get you to understand, it wasn't just George Bush. George Bush isn't the only one who did this to us. All these people who've endorsed Kamala Harris were all in on it. Dick Cheney has endorsed Kamala Harris. Hillary Clinton's running around hawking a book now, endorsing Kamala Harris. And people are speculating that if Kamala Harris is elected, that Hillary Clinton's going to be in the cabinet. They're all selling the war. But who else was selling the war in 2003 or 2002 when Bush went to Congress and got the authorization for war? Joseph Biden. This is why I include the Biden administration with the Bush-Clinton dynasties, because Biden has been there with the Bushes going back to Herbert Walker's administration. I don't have time to show you the clips, but I mean, Joe Biden was right behind Herbert Walker on everything. And then when Joe Biden was in the Senate and W comes in, Joe Biden's behind him on everything. Like I told you, the Senate was controlled by Democrats when this resolution for Iraq was passed in the Senate. And if the Democrats didn't go along with this, then the resolution would have failed. But the only reason that the resolution passed is because Joseph Biden, he recruited all of these Democrats to join with all of the Republicans to pass the resolution. Now, we had a 90%, George Bush had a 90% approval rating after 9/11. And everything else, all of the other resolutions, the resolutions to go to Afghanistan, which, I mean, you can make a case that made sense, passed unanimously, no problem. I mean, all the other legislation and that they did post 9/11, the creation of Homeland Security, even the Patriot Act. I mean, everything was passed pretty much unanimously. When the Iraq resolution, if Iraq, if it was so without a doubt, as Dick Cheney says, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, then why didn't the Senate pass the resolution unanimously? About 24 Democrats voted against the resolution, and you know, good for them, because there was no evidence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. But enough Democrats came over with all of the Republicans to pass the resolution, and the reason why they did is because of Joseph Biden, who Kamala Harris is his current vice president, and he's also endorsed her. All these people who've endorsed Kamala Harris are the ones who took us to war in Iraq. Dick Cheney, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden.
The costs of the Iraq War were enormous. More than 4,500 American soldiers, as well as thousands of military contractors, were killed. Tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers were wounded. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, and by some estimates, more than 1 million were killed. And the war created massive instability, including more wars and terrorism throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Fast forward to the 2020 presidential race. There's only one candidate for the nomination of the Democratic Party who played a leading role in actually making the Iraq War happen.
In my judgment, President Bush is right to be concerned about Saddam Hussein's relentless pursuit of weapons of mass destruction and the possibility that he may use them or share them with terrorists. Other regimes hostile to the United States and our allies already have or seek to acquire weapons of mass destruction.
This was Joe Biden in 2002, speaking as chair of the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. A few months later, when the Senate was debating whether to give President George W. Bush the authority to start a war with Iraq, Biden argued strongly in favor of granting this authority.
The objective is to compel Iraq to destroy its illegal weapons of mass destruction and its programs to develop and produce missiles and more of those weapons. Saddam is dangerous. The world would be a better place without him. But the reason he poses a growing danger to the United States and its allies is that he possesses chemical and biological weapons and is seeking nuclear weapons. And unlike...
Look at this. This is Don Rumsfeld. Don Rumsfeld, who is George Bush's defense secretary at this time, shaking Saddam's hand, and they're playing, Joe Biden saying how bad Saddam is. Well, Saddam wasn't so bad when you guys were working with him in the Ford administration and in the Reagan administration, when y'all were supplying him weapons to bomb Iran. He wasn't bad.
Is dangerous. The world would be a better place without him. But the reason he poses a growing danger to the United States and its allies is that he possesses chemical and biological weapons and is seeking nuclear weapons. And unlike
none of that was true.
My colleague from West Virginia and Maryland, I do not believe this is a rush to war. I believe it's a march to peace and security. I believe that failure to overwhelmingly support this resolution is likely to enhance the prospects that war will occur.
Joe Biden did so much more than vote for the war. He was the chair of the powerful Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, and he really used his control over that committee to make sure that a majority of the U.S. Senate voted to authorize the war. All
right, so Joe Biden is the one who recruited all the other Democratic senators. Democrats controlled the Senate at this time. He's the one who got all of them to vote for Bush's illegal war. But like I said, I could take you back to the Herbert Walker administration and show you how this guy was always supporting the Bush administrations. It doesn't matter if it was W or HW. Now, we were also talking about how at the same time Bush was taking us and making the case to take us to war in Iraq, he was also setting up the housing bubble. And the way that he was setting up the housing bubble is that he was encouraging mortgage lenders and banks and financial lenders to loosen the standards on lending, get rid of the fine print, is what he says. He was asking them to create creative ways to finance, and they did. They created loans like the option arm, which was an adjustable rate loan. You have a small introductory rate to get you in the door. Plus, he was giving down payment assistance, just like Kamala Harris is saying that she wants to do to get people into homes. And Kamala Harris says in that interview or that town hall with Oprah that we're just going to get you through the door and then you do the hard work later. Well, that's what George Bush's plan was. We're just going to get the loan out to you. It's adjustable rate mortgage or loan. It's an interest only loan. Whatever creative way we came up to get you in the loan, and then whatever happens later, then that's on you. You'll do the heavy lifting. Just enough to show GDP growth at the same time that I am taking you to war in Iraq, at the same time that I'm cutting taxes, that George Bush needed to show that GDP growth. So that's why he created the housing bubble and got all these subprime borrowers into the housing market that shouldn't have been in the housing market, that couldn't afford any of these houses. He didn't care anything about that. Just get them in, get this market going so I can show GDP growth so I can get reelected. Because I still got to get reelected in 2004. And if there's a recession going on because I started this war that nobody likes and everybody was complaining about, or because I cut taxes, if there's a recession because I cut taxes and because I've taken us to war, everybody's going to point at me and say that, that the economy's bad because of me, and then I'm not going to get reelected. So at the same time I'm taking us to war, at the same time I'm cutting taxes, I have to show growth from someplace. There has to be GDP growth. The economy has to show that it is still thriving despite the fact that we're going to war, and then I'm cutting taxes. And it was really important for Bush to get the United States after 9/11 back to normal. If you guys, if you're Gen Zer or millennial and you don't know that after 9/11, there's this speech that George Bush gives at O'Hare Airport. And at that time, nobody wanted to fly, nobody wanted to travel. I mean, we'd just been hit with this, huge attack. And that's the thing about, the United States of America. They know how to sacrifice, how to, I believe this. I believe that if George Bush would have came out and said that, look, we're going to rescind the tax cuts. We're not going to cut taxes the same way that FDR did in 2002, where or 2002 in World War II. FDR came out and he asked the nation to join in the war effort, that we're not just going to send the men off to fight the war, that there's going to be a war effort here in the United States where we're going to support them, that it's going to be hard on us. We're going to have to sacrifice. We're going to have to struggle, but it's all going to be in the name of winning the war. We're going to support, not just send the men off and fight. Everybody here in the United States were feeling the war when the war was going on. It was, everybody was, living, breathing the war. It was all that mattered because the president of the United States asked the entire nation to aid in this war effort. That's not what George Bush did after 9/11. George Bush didn't want the United States of America thinking anything about the war. He told in this press conference at O'Hare, he told people, to go around the country and to get back to traveling and go shopping and, get back to normal. We need you to get back to normal. Don't think about the war. Don't think about what we're doing over there, running up your debt. So that was part of it. So he had to create this marketplace. He had to create the housing bubble. So there's growth in the economy. The economy is thriving, so people are making money and, aloof to the war, aloof to what's going on, and just getting back to normal. Listen to a little bit more of this speech that he gave in 2002 when he created this bubble.
I mean, when I lay out a goal, I mean it. But we also have got to bring others into the process, most particularly the real estate industry. After all, the real estate industry benefits when people are encouraged to buy homes. It's in their self-interest that we encourage people to buy homes. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about a little bit today is how to create a sustained commitment by the private sector that will have a powerful impact. First of all, we want to make sure that we help work to expand capital available to buyers.
Listen.
And as I mentioned, overcome the barriers that I've delineated, as well as provide the education component. In other words, this is not just a federal responsibility. That's why I've challenged the industry leaders all across the country to get after it for this goal, to stay focused, to make sure that we achieve a more secure America by achieving the goal of 5.5 million new minority homeowners. I call it America's Home Ownership Challenge. First of all, government-sponsored corporations that help create our mortgage system. I introduced two of the leaders here today. They call those people Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, as well as the federal home loan banks, will increase their commitment to minority markets by more than $440 billion.
So he was encouraging the private sector and the lenders, like I said, to create the creative financing, the adjustable rates, whatever you can do. Let's get these. He keeps, and that's what is so sickening about it, because it was an initiative that he said that he wants to get more minorities, that I want to get more minorities into homes. And he's just using minorities to crash the economy and do this loot job, because not only minorities took advantage of him lowering the standards and the adjustable, everyone. You couldn't just say that it's just for minorities, but he used the narrative of we need to get minorities in home to get, and it's just sickening. These people are so evil. Well, some people saw that the housing bubble was a bubble. Several people noticed it. One of the first people that noticed this housing bubble that George Bush had created was this guy named Dean Baker, who wrote this article in The Nation in August of 2004. So this is a few months before the election in 2004. That's an election year. And this article comes out in the Nation. It's called Bush's House of Cards. Subtitle: as bad as Bush's economy record is, it would appear far worse if not for the housing bubble. So some people started to see it. Not a lot of people. The majority of people were living off the high times. They were spending up the money. The stock market was booming. It was just boom, boom, boom. Money, money, money. The majority of people were, and people like Dean Baker, people like Peter Schiff, other people who were predicting that, hey, this is a bubble. This is getting ready to crash. This isn't good. Those people were called naysayers, and they were, laughed at and said, you're just raining on our parade. We're living off this good times. The good times are good. and these guys were like, voices that were just like, they were trying to warn, and they were like, hey, man, look, this is a bubble. This is a bubble. And nah, it's not a bubble. Get out of here, you naysayer. Dean Baker says in this article, and this is 2004, and this is 2 years after 2004. This is 2 years after George Bush does the American Dream initiative to get all these people into homes. And 2 years before the actual crash starts to happen. The latest data on growth suggests the economy may again be faltering. Just when President Bush desperately needs good numbers to make the case for his reelection, as bad as Bush's economic record is, it would be far worse if not for the growth of an unsustainable housing bubble through 3.5 years of the Bush administration. The housing market has supported the economy both directly through construction of new homes and purchases of existing homes, and indirectly by allowing families to borrow against the increased value of their home. Housing construction is up more than 17% from this level at the end of the recession. Purchases of existing homes hit a record of 6.1 million in 2003, more than 500,000 above the previous record set in 2002. Why would that happen? Let me read that sentence again. Purchases of existing homes hit a record of 6.1 million in 2003, a year after George Bush gives this speech and this initiative. 6.1 million in 2003, more than 500,000 above the previous record set in 2002. Each home purchased is accompanied by $1,000 of closing costs plus thousands more spent on furniture, remodeling. Basically, what Dean Baker's saying here is that the housing market is driving the entire growth in the economy. If it's not building new homes, if it's not the loans, if it's not the money that's being made in the stock market on the mortgage-backed securities and CDOs, if it's not new furniture sales at the furniture store, if it's not, the appraisers, they're booming. Everything in the economy is being touched by the housing market, and it's driving all of the growth, is what Dean Baker says in that article in 2004. Peter Schiff is another one who saw the crash before it came. He was laughed at by many people. I want you to take a listen to this clip.
Slow down, but it's not going to be a
All right,
crash.
let me ask you this. A lot of folks out there point to the housing market and they say that a huge percentage of the jobs created, some argue as much as 30% of the job creation over the last few years, has been because of the housing boom.
30% of job creation was coming from the housing market.
Out there point to the housing market and they say that a huge percentage of the jobs created, some argue as much as 30% of the job creation over the last few years, has been because of the housing boom, whether it's construction, whether it's mortgage brokers, real estate brokers, etc. And if that all goes away, what happens to those jobs?
There will be lots of things to fill it back up again, Michelle.
Bottom line is?
Bottom line is I'm a big bear on the U.S. stock market. You know, the Dow Jones already is down 20% year-to-date priced in gold. That is a tremendous loss of purchasing power. The Dow has lost better than 60% of its value since its peak in 2000.
Sounds like good management to me. Sounds like good management of the economy to me. It's just like a corporation. You know, if we have a huge deficit, I mean, we're making money on the money. We're borrowing more than...
Listen to this guy. The deficit doesn't matter. We're making money. We're making money, even though the money is coming from this bubble, and there's going to be a crash later, and we're going to end up having to bail everybody out. The deficits don't matter. We're making money. We're making money. Listen to what he said. You're just a naysayer, Peter Schiff.
Sounds like good management of the economy to me. It's just like a corporation. You know, if we have a huge deficit, I mean, we're making money on the money. We're borrowing more than the people who are getting for lending it to us.
No,
we're not. Like corporate America.
We've sort of seen that play out, and I think that, you know, it's interesting that you go through a 20-year period where gold is underperforming, you get a 2-year period where gold is outperformed, and every gold bug comes out of the woodwork and wants to tell you how you should own gold and not Google, and I'm not sure I can rationalize that decision.
Remember, gold was in a bear market for 20 years. Stocks were in a bull market for 20 years. That's changed, and people have to understand that, or they're going to lose a lot of money. You know, I mean, the gold rally, I think, is still early on. I don't know, do you own any gold yet, Art?
No, just my wedding ring.
Yeah, so Schiff's big on gold. I don't want to play. There's a lot of this clip. There's another shorter clip, but everyone's laughing at him. He was one of the people who saw the crash coming. Dean Baker was one of the people who saw the crash coming. This is after the crash that Peter Schiff's giving this talk here. I want you to listen to a little bit of what he says here, how he recognized and that he knew that the crash was coming. It wasn't, big secret to anyone who's looked at it.
The premise of this book was that we were living in a bubble economy. We had a phony economy that was based on spending borrowed money. We were borrowing money from the world because the world saved and we didn't, and then we used that borrowed money to buy products that they produced. We also used the money to build houses and remodel houses, and Wall Street used the money for all sorts of speculations. But the bottom line is we weren't being productive. We were living in an illusion. And as we spent money and we kept, counting that spending in our GDP, we deluded ourselves into thinking we had economic growth because an economist pointed to an expanding GDP. Meanwhile, we ignored the fact that growth was increasingly comprised of spending money. And we ignored the fact that we were going into debt to spend that money. And no one seemed to care about all the liabilities that we were accumulating because they were blinded by real estate equity or stock market valuations. And people thought, well, the debt is manageable because look at all these assets. Well, the assets were an illusion. There wasn't any real value there. Our stocks were not being valued based on the dividends they paid. Our real estate wasn't being valued based on the rents it threw off. So we had no real income on the assets to service the debts. The only way we can service the debts is if we can sell the assets. But the minute we try to sell the assets, the price implodes. And the problem with the debt is the debt doesn't go away. When the asset prices go down, the debt doesn't go down. The debt's still there until we default on it. Meanwhile, the debt has to be serviced. We have to pay interest in our debt. We're not getting income on the assets, but we have to pay our creditors interest on the debt.
Who are they?
And the problem was, and I certainly saw that when I was writing the book, that a lot of the debt was floating rate. A lot of the mortgage debt had teaser rates, where initially for the first few years you get a low payment. But then what happens after the teaser rate expires? You have to make much higher payments. So we were judging the manageability of the debt based on the teaser rates. We weren't factoring in what happens. I mean, everybody knows a lot of times you can subscribe to cable television and they'll give you, 3 months free. But obviously at some point, the real rate kicks in.
So what is he talking about? He's talking about the adjustable rate mortgages, the option arms, all the creative financing that George Bush asked the lenders to put in place back in 2002. We need the private sector to come up with creative ways to finance and get these minorities into homes. And they use these adjustable rate mortgages. That was the creative financing. And what Peter Schiff is saying here is that we realized this. We looked at this and said that all these mortgages were getting ready to adjust up in 2006, 2007. It's going to be a huge problem. So he recognized it. Dean Baker recognized that it was going to. Michael Burry, of course, from The Big Short. He recognized it. At least he acted on it and made some money on it. And he said, well, I'm going to hedge it. But he saw the same thing that Peter Schiff saw, that all these mortgages are getting ready to adjust. And you got all these subprime borrowers. Wait a minute, this thing's getting ready to crash. I need to make some money. So he's the one who had them create the credit default swap, and he made money on it. And again, the book and the movie, The Big Short, is about him and others who bought these swaps and got rich off of the crash. But he wasn't the only one who got rich off the crash. A lot of other people got rich off the crash too. A lot of other people got rich off the crash. But Michael Burry saw what was happening. And Peter Schiff saw what was happening and that the crash was going to happen. I want you to take a look at this clip. This is a clip from the end of the movie, The Big Short, if you haven't seen the movie. And these are also characters that are based on people that saw the crash coming and that, like Michael Burry, bought these credit default swaps and got rich off of this, betting that the market was going to crash. But I want you to take a look at this last scene from the movie The Big Short.
Mark, you there? Mark.
Paulson and Bernanke just left the White House. There's going to be a bailout.
So he says Paulson and Bernanke just left the White House. A couple of podcasts ago, we talked about and played the clip of Paulson and Bernanke frantically going into Nancy Pelosi's office that the economy is going to crash unless you give us $700 billion. So that's what this character in The Big Short is saying. And this is all dramatized. This isn't from the book, this whole scene, but he's saying that, after they went to Pelosi's office, they went to the White House and there's going to be a bailout. What's he talking about? He's talking about the Troubled Assets and Relief Program, the bank bailout. That's what he's talking about.
There's going to be a bailout.
Well, they had to. Right? I mean, paper markets would have collapsed.
They knew.
Cash would have stopped coming out of ATMs. They had to backstop this.
They knew.
They knew the taxpayers would bail them out. They weren't being stupid. They just didn't care.
They weren't being stupid. They knew. They knew the taxpayers are going to bail them out. They knew. They knew at the end of this that they could hold the taxpayers hostage. That's why they repealed Glass-Steagall. That's why they did all the deregulation in the Clinton administration so they can hold the taxpayers hostage, because they knew it wasn't an accident what happened. The crash was not an accident. They knew the taxpayers were going to bail them out, and they also knew it was going to run up the debt. They also knew that. This is what you call wealth transfer, people. This is what you call wealth transfer.
There's going to be a bailout.
Well, they had to. Right? I mean, paper markets would have
They
collapsed.
knew.
Cash would have stopped coming out of ATMs. They had to backstop this.
They knew the taxpayers would bail them out. They weren't being stupid. They just didn't care.
Yeah, because they're fucking crooks.
Because they're crooks. Because they're crooks.
We're going to see some of them go to jail.
At least we're going to see some of them go to jail. At least we're going to see some of them go to jail is what this character says.
Yeah, because they're fucking crooks. But at least we're going to see some of them go to jail. Right? I mean, they're going to have to break up the banks. I mean, the party's over.
I don't know. I have a feeling that in a few years, people are going to be doing what they always do when the economy tanks. They will be blaming immigrants and poor people.
They will be blaming immigrants and poor people. I have a feeling. Now, this is dramatized. Whoever wrote this script, this isn't from the book, whoever wrote this script from Hollywood, put this line in there that in a few years after the crash, when everybody's getting back to normal and the economy is bad, stemming from this and all of this debt and the loot job that these people did, absolutely looted us. After all of this, they're going to be blaming poor people and immigrants, is what he says here in this scene.
Interesting. In a few years, people are going to be doing what they always do when the economy tanks. They will be blaming immigrants and poor people.
But Mark was wrong. In the years that followed, hundreds of bankers and rating agencies executives went to jail. The SEC was completely overhauled, and Congress had no choice but to break up the big banks and regulate the mortgage and derivatives industries. Just kidding.
Just kidding. None of that happened. None of that happened. Nobody went to jail. None of that. Nobody was held accountable. And why was nobody held accountable? Because that's where Obama comes in. I tell you, when we get to Obama's part, I'm going to tell you Obama's part in all of this scam, because that's where he came in. Because he was running on change. He was running on change in 2008, and he was running against all of this. He had something to say about all of this and how he was going to come in and change everything. And that meant holding people accountable. And it was going to be his job to hold people accountable and to change and to rectify what these crooks did. These crooks, where are they at? These guys. It was going to be Obama's job. What'd he do? We'll talk about Obama's part. So another person who saw what was happening before it happened was Brooksley Born. And we talked a little bit about Brooksley Born in the podcast before last. She was the head of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, in the Clinton administration. And she saw the problem with these derivatives. And we've been talking about derivatives because the bailout that they talk about in that clip, the bailout, $700 billion, as I've been telling you, it's called the Troubled Assets and Relief Program, TARP. TARP was designed at purchasing two types of troubled assets: residential and commercial real estate obligations, which, like I said, still had value, but there were also any other financial instruments, or B, is what TARP was bailing out. And I've been telling you that those financial instruments were mortgage-backed securities, CDOs, and derivatives. But derivatives were the big player because derivatives were a $27 trillion black box marketplace. And like I've been telling you in the past podcast, that derivatives are financial obligations that are derivatives of another underlying asset. And the other underlying asset could be stock in a company, it could be commodities, it could even be another derivative. It can be student loan debt. It can be housing in the housing market. And I believe these derivatives that took down, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and set off the crash in 2008 were tied to the mortgages or mortgage-backed securities or something having to do with the housing market, because all of a sudden they became worthless. And we'll talk more about that in the next podcast. But Brooksley Born, like Peter Schiff, like Michael Burry, like Dean Baker, and like others who saw this crash coming. She didn't see the real estate part, but when she was in the Clinton administration, she definitely saw the dangers with derivatives, and she tried to regulate them. And these guys, they stopped her. They prevented her from regulating these derivatives. I want to play a little bit more of this this documentary, The Warning, and this will probably be the end of the podcast. I have maybe one more thing that I have to, if I have time.
But in Washington, there was one agency that looked at the bull market with some skepticism. Buried deep in the bureaucracy, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, CFTC.
It was a small fish in otherwise a pretty big pond. It was always viewed as kind of a sleeping, small, not terribly significant agency.
The agency was authorized to regulate agriculture futures and to oversee arcane, complex financial instruments known as derivatives.
They're one of these little afterthought agencies that kind of get in the way of the big guys.
The CFTC started getting in the way in 1996 when a new chairperson, Brooksley Born, took over.
My law practice was in the derivatives area. I'd practiced derivatives law for more than 20 years.
Brooksley Born is a long-time securities lawyer. She has a stellar reputation. She's been around the block. She knows her stuff.
Born was 55, a veteran of the gender wars that had influenced many women of her age group. In Born's case, the struggle had started early. Born went to Stanford in the early 1960s. Most women in her class got married. Brooksley went to law school.
There were very few women in law school at the time. This was during the Vietnam War. And a lot of men in the class saying, "What are you doing here? You're taking the place of somebody, a man who could be here and not have to go to the war." The way she approached this was, well, I got to show them I can do it.
She did, top of her class. The first female president of the Stanford Law Review.
You would think this would be a great moment of triumph for Brooksley Born. Instead, she gets a phone call from one of the deans, and he says, "Brooksley, I just want to let you know that the faculty stands ready to step in if you're not able to pull this off." It goes on like that, on and on and on at each step of Brooksley Born's life and career.
In Washington, she became a partner in a prestigious law firm, built an international reputation, formed alliances with other powerful female attorneys, including one who happened to be the wife of Arkansas's governor.
She had developed a very close relationship with Hillary Clinton when Hillary Clinton was a very prominent lawyer in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And then Bill Clinton won the presidency.
Brooksley Born found herself being invited down to Arkansas during the transition for a meeting with him to discuss possibly being the Attorney General of the United States.
She's very self-effacing. You know, she's flattered, but she's going to see if it happens.
Week 7 of the Clinton transition. NBC's Andrea Mitchell tonight.
For Attorney General, Clinton is considering Washington lawyer Brooksley Born, but he may have...
Brooksley went in for an interview with Clinton. The story that comes back was that Clinton found her boring and that it never went anywhere.
It didn't happen. Janet Reno was chosen.
Now, why do you think anybody who knows anything about Janet Reno and the Clinton administration, why do you think that that Bill Clinton went with Janet Reno over a woman like Brooksley Born? As you learn more about Brooksley Born here, it's going to become evident if you know anything about Janet Reno.
And that's how Brooksley Born ended up running the obscure CFTC.
I think to some extent you could view this as a consolation prize. To the general world, people who knew Brooksley, the circles she traveled, the American Bar Association, the D.C. Bar, all the prestigious boards she served on, people were probably scratching their heads.
An experienced financial litigator who'd seen the worst of the markets, Born was a believer in government regulation. Given the political climate in Washington at the time, clashes with Greenspan, Rubin, and Summers were inevitable. Almost right away, she had one. It began after she received an invitation to lunch at the Federal Reserve with the chairman himself.
How could you not have a little bit of butterflies in your stomach when you're going to go see Alan Greenspan at that moment in time?
It didn't take long for Born to learn that she and the chairman were not going to see eye to eye.
He said something to the effect of, well, Brooksley, we're never going to agree on fraud. And she said, well, what do you mean? And he said, you probably think there should be rules against it.
That this is what Alan Greenspan told Brooksley Born in their first meeting, that we're not going to agree on fraud because you probably think that there should be rules against fraud. Alan Greenspan told Brooksley Born that we're not going to agree on fraud because you probably think there should be rules against fraud.
Well, Brooksley, we're never going to agree on fraud. And she said, well, what do you mean? And he said, you probably think there should be rules against it. She said, well, yes, I do. He said, I think the market will figure it out.
The market would figure out fraud. The market would figure out fraud. That there should be no regulation against fraud. The market will figure it out. There was a lot of fraud in the housing market in 2009 and leading up to 2009. A lot of fraud that went on. A lot of fraud that should have been prosecuted, but Obama let them off.
He said, you probably think there should be rules against it. She said, well, yes, I do. He said, I think the market will figure it out and take care of the fraudsters.
The Alan Greenspan lunch, did it actually happen? Where he says...
I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it on camera.
Bourne is reluctant to speak about her meetings with Greenspan or others in the Clinton administration. Greenspan refused to speak to Frontline at all, but Bourne's advisors did.
Greenspan didn't believe that fraud was something that needed to be enforced, and he assumed she probably did. And of course she did. I've never met a financial regulator who didn't feel that fraud was part of their mission.
Fraud. Fraud
is an absolute...
We're talking about financial fraud.
Stunner for the new head of this tiny agency who is charged with making sure people don't commit fraud.
Well, I think she was taken aback about how far he would go towards deregulation, that even the notion that we should police fraudulent activity he didn't think was something that was a given.
All right, so that tells you a little bit about Alan Greenspan. Maybe we'll get more into this documentary and play a little bit more about these derivatives, but I want to get into how these derivatives took down Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, and then get into Obama's role and the Obama administration's role in all of this. But we'll pick this up on Monday. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.